I wiped down the bar for what felt like the 100th time tonight. The sweet layer of alcohol mixed with the beer spilled from glasses, leaving the counter tacky and stubbornly dirty no matter how hard I scrubbed. The smell of cheap vodka mingled with sweat and too much perfume, forming a heavy, clinging air that wrapped itself around the cramped space of the Copper Line, an old bar in South Brooklyn, where I had been mixing drinks for the past 3 years to earn enough to raise my son. Friday nights were always small storms, but tonight felt different, strangely heavy. "Haley, table 4 wants another round." Jerry's voice rose from behind the register, not bothering to lift his head from the pile of loose bills he was counting. His Brooklyn accent thickened when he was tense, and tonight, the deep crease between his brows told me just how tense he was. "Yeah, I got it," I muttered, reaching for a tray and arranging 4 bottles of local beer on it, stealing a glance at the clock. 11:30. Another hour and a half before closing. Then the real work would start. Cleaning up, restocking, and counting tips I already knew wouldn't cover Ethan's school fees this month. My son, my 9-year-old boy, who was probably curled up right now in the tiny break room behind the kitchen, hunched over 3rd-grade math homework under a flickering fluorescent light. I knew he was trying, just like I was trying every day to survive. He was gentle, quiet, perceptive, and always knew when to stay silent. The way he grabbed his own food, stayed far from drunk customers, and never asked for anything made me both ache and feel grateful. I wanted a different childhood for him, but dreams and reality rarely walk side by side in my life. I headed to table 4, where 4 construction workers in worn reflective jackets sat. They nodded as I set the beers down. "Thanks, Haley," one of them said, his eyes tired but kind. "Long week." I gave a faint smile. "Aren't they all?" When I turned back toward the bar, a cold shiver crawled down my spine. The door had just opened, cold wind rushing in with 2 unfamiliar men. Black suits, neat ties, polished shoes, eyes sweeping the room as if scanning it. They stood out too sharply against the usual crowd in t-shirts and jeans drinking from cans. They didn't say a word, just walked straight to the bar, sat down, and stayed silent. I felt one of them watching me, not in a hungry way, but with no warmth either. Jerry noticed them too. I saw his hand slide down to the bat he kept under the counter, a habit I'd seen more than once when drunk troublemakers wandered in. "What can I get you to?" Jerry asked, trying to sound casual, but his tension slipped through. The taller man didn't answer. He just kept looking at me, his expression thoughtful, almost analyzing every detail of my face. Then he tilted his head slightly, as if confirming something. Unease washed through me like an undertow. I didn't know who they were or what they wanted, but with the instinct of a mother, I knew one thing. Tonight would not end peacefully. If you're listening up to this point and something in this story touches a quiet place inside you, take just 1 second to subscribe to our channel. Like and share this video so we have the strength to keep bringing emotional stories every day. And if you don't mind, tell me, where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and let us know which corner of the world this story has reached. We truly cherish every word you share with us. I forced myself to stay calm as I returned to the bar, wiped my hands on my apron, and poured 2 bourbons out of instinct even though they hadn't ordered. The taller man, his hair cropped short and a faint scar tracing from his left ear down toward his jaw, accepted the glass without a word. The shorter one, eyes sharp behind rimless glasses, slowly rotated his drink on the counter as if measuring my reaction with each tiny movement. Neither spoke, neither joked, neither acted drunk or relaxed. They weren't here to unwind. They were here with purpose, and I was the center of that purpose. "Quieter than usual tonight," the shorter one said, his voice smooth and low, not the voice of someone local. I nodded, avoiding his gaze. "Guess everyone's tired after a long week." My hand kept wiping the counter as if the motion alone could hide the growing anxiety tightening in my chest. "How long have you worked here?" 3 years. "You raise your kid alone, don't you?" I froze. How did he know that? My breath caught in my throat. I looked straight into his eyes, and for the first time saw a thin, cold smile, completely devoid of warmth. "We just know how to observe," the taller one spoke, his fingers brushing my wrist as I set a bottle back in its place. "Your tattoo is beautiful. Very distinctive." I pulled my hand back instinctively. Under the sleeve was the tattoo of 3 white plum blossoms, one petal falling. I'd gotten it at 20, young and foolish, just because I loved a line from an old Japanese film. No one had noticed it in years. Until tonight. Do you know what that symbol means? The shorter man asked, his voice slow, and even now, as if reciting a sentence. I shook my head, keeping my tone steady. No, it's just a tattoo. I liked the look of it. The two men exchanged a brief glance. Then the taller one stood and gestured for me to follow him toward the back kitchen. We need to talk. Just a few minutes. I looked at Jerry, but he had already turned away, silent. I understood immediately. He'd seen men like this before, and he chose not to intervene. I swallowed hard, turned, and led them into the narrow hallway between the cold storage and the break room. My heart thudded like a drum. I don't know who you are, but I haven't done anything wrong, I said before they could speak. The shorter man stepped closer, his gaze hardening. We're not here because you made a mistake. We're here because you carry the symbol of a faction that betrayed my family in Tokyo. My eyes widened, but before I could react, the taller man grabbed my arm, yanked it hard, exposing the tattoo beneath my sleeve. A falling petal, the mark of an undercover traitor, and you wear it like jewelry. He hissed the words, then suddenly punched me in the stomach. Pain exploded through my body, dropping me to my knees, coughing, the taste of metal pooling in my mouth. I told you I don't know anything, I screamed, tears spilling from pain and fear. They didn't listen. A sharp kick slammed into my shoulder, sending me crashing against the wall. And then, a voice tore through the hallway. Leave my mom alone. Ethan's voice trembled from the end of the hall, but it carried a fury I'd never heard from him. He stood there, eyes wide, fingers clutching his worn backpack, his expression no longer that of a child. The taller man paused, looking from me to the boy. You taught him to be brave. He smirked, but the shorter one raised a hand, signaling to stop. Let's go. This isn't over. And they left as quickly as they came. I struggled to stand, my body screaming, and pulled Ethan into my arms as he ran to me, tears streaming down his face. I didn't know what had just happened. I only knew one thing. Nothing from this moment on would ever be the same. I hadn't even gathered myself when the cold hand of the shorter man clamped around my wrist again, yanking me so hard I stumbled. He spun back faster than I could react, his eyes sharp as blades locking onto mine with an accusation far harsher than before. You think this ends so easily? He growled, then shoved me hard against the rough concrete wall. Pain shot down my back, my breath caught in my chest, and my knees nearly buckled. Ethan screamed, "Don't touch my mom," but his voice only made things worse. The taller man whipped around, stalking toward my son like a predator spotting small, helpless prey. I lurched forward, instinct taking over, but the shorter one blocked me with an arm as solid as iron. He pinned me down, the kind of grip that made it clear that if I moved 1 inch more, he would hurt me without hesitation. Ethan took one step back, his eyes wide with fear but also fierce with something that looked painfully like bravery. His small hand clutched his worn backpack as if it were a flimsy shield. My mom doesn't know anything. Leave her alone. The taller man bent down to Ethan's level, his eyes so cold I wanted to scream for him to stop, to leave my child out of this. Brave kid, he muttered, giving Ethan a small shove that made him stumble. Courage gets people killed early. I thrashed upward, desperate, yelling, "Don't touch him. I told you I don't know anything." But my voice was crushed as the shorter man tightened his grip on my shoulder, his breath brushing against my skin like the first icy wind of winter. You need to tell us who gave you that mark, he hissed, squeezing my wrist until it felt like my blood had stopped flowing. I told you no one. I got it because I liked it. That's all. I sobbed, pain and helplessness pouring out of me. My answer only infuriated him more. His hand rose, ready to strike. I squeezed my eyes shut, knowing I couldn't dodge it. But the blow didn't land. Instead, I heard Ethan's shaky breathing and then the sound of feet pounding the floor. When I opened my eyes, Ethan had sprinted away, his little legs hitting the hallway floor with urgent, echoing thuds. "Ethan, no, come back!" I screamed, my voice tearing out of my throat. But he didn't stop. He ran toward the back door of the bar, through the kitchen, past the stacks of cardboard boxes, running with every ounce of fear and instinct a child feels when he sees his mother being hurt. The taller man cursed and moved to chase him, but the shorter one grabbed his arm. "No, the kid doesn't know anything. She's the one we want." He turned back to me, his eyes dark and bottomless. "We'll be back. And next time, no one runs." They left, the echo of their leather shoes pounding on cold concrete, fading as the hallway swallowed them. I collapsed, trembling violently. Somehow, I forced myself to breathe, to crawl, to stand. I had to find Ethan. I staggered toward the back exit, my sandals slapping against the floor in a frantic rhythm that matched my racing heart. Outside, the night was frigid, the wind slapping my face until my eyes stung. A light drizzle blurred the streetlights into smears of gold. Ethan was nowhere. Only the long alley stretching into darkness, and the turn leading to the main street. I inhaled deeply, my chest burning, and ran toward the street. "Ethan, Ethan, where are you?" I shouted until my throat felt raw, but my son didn't answer. A fear deeper than anything I had ever known clawed up through me. If they came back, if they found him, if I couldn't let myself finish the thought. I ran through tears, legs trembling, but I didn't stop. I had to find him before anyone else did. I prayed as I ran, holding on to the only hope I had left. Ethan was smart. He would seek light, seek people, seek safety. And just when my heart felt like it might break open, I saw a small figure a short distance ahead, standing under the warm glow outside an upscale Manhattan restaurant. He was panting hard, his clothes soaked, his eyes red, and he was crying out with a trembling but determined voice, "Someone please help my mom. Please, somebody help." And that was the moment that pulled us into a world I never imagined existed. In the soft golden light of the restaurant's entrance, Ethan was shaking from the cold, his tiny hand gripping the arm of the first man who stepped outside after hearing his cry. The man wore a black suit, tall and solid, each step carrying the weight of something larger than himself. He wasn't a security guard. He wasn't a diner. He was Dante Moretti, the owner of Moretti's Table and the man Ethan had instinctively run to. "You're saying your mother's in trouble?" Dante lowered himself to Ethan's eye level, his dark gaze flashing with a sharpness I couldn't name. Ethan nodded quickly, his voice breaking with emotion. "Two men. They hurt my mom. She said she was okay, but they said they'd come back. I didn't know what to do. I just remembered she once held this." He pulled a small, rain-soaked card from his pocket, the restaurant's logo and Dante's name still visible through the water stains. Dante took it, studied it for only a moment, then stood abruptly. "Ryan," he called to a younger man standing near the door, "bring the car. Now." Ethan didn't have time to process anything before Dante scooped him up, wrapped him in his coat, and strode toward the black car parked along the curb. In less than 5 minutes, the car was slicing through Brooklyn's rain-slicked streets, neon lights smearing across the windows, horns echoing through the night air. Ethan held tightly to Dante's hand, though they had never met before. Something in Dante made him feel safe. When the car pulled up outside the copper line, the bar was nearly dark, only a faint glow coming from the hallway behind the kitchen. Dante gestured for Ryan and another man to follow, then gently set Ethan down, instructing him firmly to stay inside the car. "Not a step outside until I return." Ethan nodded, his worried eyes glued to the back door of the bar. Dante moved inside without a sound, his tall frame melting into the shadows, but his gaze scanned every corner, as if he had known places like this his entire life. He found Haley sitting against the wall, clutching her shoulder, her face pale and streaked with tears. She didn't hear him until he spoke. "Are you Haley Grant?" His voice was deep and steady, not threatening, but carrying the kind of weight that demanded honesty. Haley startled, her eyes lifting toward him, panic flickering across her face before exhaustion pulled her downward. "Where's Ethan?" she whispered, her first instinct still her child. Dante paused for a brief moment. Then he nodded. "He's safe. He came to me. That's why I'm here." Haley covered her face as tears poured down again, relief, humiliation, the lingering ache in her shoulder all blending together. Dante stepped closer, signaling for Ryan and the other man to sweep the building. Then he knelt beside Haley, examining the bruises on her wrist and cheek. His expression hardened, turning cold as stone. "What did they say to you?" "They asked about my tattoo. Said it was some symbol of spies, something tied to Tokyo. I don't understand. I just got it because I thought it was pretty." Dante was silent for a long moment. He stared at the tattoo, 3 plum blossoms and a falling petal, and let out a slow breath, as if confirming something ancient and dangerous. "We can't stay here." He lifted Haley gently, as if she were made of glass. "I'm taking you and your son somewhere safe. And from this moment on, I need to know everything you've ever seen, heard, or thought connected to that tattoo." "I told you I don't know anything," Haley repeated, her voice trembling with fear and exhaustion. Dante met her gaze, then nodded once, slowly. "I believe you, but others won't, and that's why you need me." Haley looked at him, and for the first time, she saw not just power in his eyes, but something that resembled worry. Or perhaps responsibility, or sorrow. She couldn't tell. But she understood one thing clearly. She and her son had stepped into a world entirely different from the one she knew. And this man, Dante Moretti, was the only door out of the nightmare she never chose to enter. The black car moved through the night like a silent phantom. Haley sat in the back seat, her head leaning against Ethan's, holding his hand as if it were the last thread connecting her to reality. Dante sat across from them, watching quietly, saying nothing more. He had already made the necessary call, and when the car stopped, the side entrance of Moretti's table was open, warm light spilling from inside like an entirely different world. An older man in a leather jacket, silver hair, and sharp eyes was waiting. "This is Giovanni," Dante said, "the one I trust the most. He'll take you and Ethan to a temporary suite on the 3rd floor. You'll be safe there. No one finds you unless I want them to." Haley nodded weakly, following Giovanni up the stairs while taking in everything around her. The restaurant, though closed for the night, was spotless. Bottles lined up by color and year, the smell of oak wood and faint herbs drifting in, the air. The 3rd floor didn't look like staff quarters, it looked like a hidden luxury apartment. 2 bedrooms, a small living room, a private kitchen, windows overlooking a quiet park. Ethan collapsed onto the bed the moment he saw it, eyes closed, still clutching his mother's fingers. "Thank you," Haley whispered, when Giovanni handed her a warm towel and a few painkillers. He just nodded and left, giving her the first quiet moment she'd had all night. Morning came with the smell of toasted bread and coffee. Haley crept downstairs, drawn by the soft clinking of utensils from the kitchen. There, she found Dante wearing an apron, slicing bread with practiced ease while Ethan sat on a high chair watching him work like a magician. "Good morning," Dante said when he saw her, his voice low but somehow calming the entire room. "I figured you both needed a proper breakfast." Haley hesitated, taking in the way he moved, the orderliness of the kitchen, the gentle stillness he created around them like a blanket. After they ate, Dante led her to a long table in the wine room, shelves of dark wood surrounding them like an old library. "I want you to understand where you are," he said. "This isn't just a restaurant, it's my headquarters." He spoke without arrogance, just fact. Haley tightened her hands, nervous. "So, what are you?" "I'm the one who keeps balance," he replied. "I don't call myself a boss or a leader. I handle what must be handled so things don't fall into chaos." Haley said nothing. She didn't know whether to fear him or to be grateful. "And the tattoo?" she asked quietly. Dante nodded. "It's the symbol of a group that once aligned with a rival faction in Japan. A group that was wiped out over 10 years ago. For you to wear it is no coincidence." Haley blinked, her heartbeat quickening. "I swear I didn't know." Dante nodded slowly. "I believe you, but others won't, which is why you need protection." She stared at him, and for the first time, she saw something beyond authority, something like concern, or burden, or the quiet remnants of an old wound. She didn't know. But she understood one thing. She and her son were now part of a world she never asked to enter, and this man, Dante Moretti, was the only one standing between them and whatever darkness was coming. Haley sat quietly on the soft leather chair in the 3rd floor living room, where the morning light slipped gently through the cream-colored curtains and settled over her hands, clasped tightly together. Ethan was taking an afternoon nap in the room next door, breathing evenly after a long, exhausting night. Silence filled the apartment, but inside her, waves kept rising and falling without rest. She had listened to everything, had understood at least part of the world. She had accidentally stepped into a world governed by unspoken rules, shadowed handshakes, and decisions that could never afford to be wrong. But for her, the only thing that mattered was Ethan's safety, and at this moment, there was only one man who could guarantee it. When Dante knocked softly and stepped inside, Haley didn't look up right away. She drew a slow breath, then lifted her head, her eyes clearer and steadier than at any point since they had met. "I'm staying," she said, her voice low and firm, no longer trembling like the night before. "Not because I want to be involved in your world, but because I can't keep letting my son run for his life." Dante studied her for a few seconds before giving a small nod. "You just made a difficult decision, but the right one." He pulled a chair across from her and sat down, his gaze calm, deep like an undisturbed lake. "But you need to understand what staying means. You're no longer an outsider. Your name, your tattoo, your presence, they've drawn attention. That puts you on the board of the game I'm keeping together." Haley bit her lip, lightly, then nodded. "I don't know what I can do, but I'm willing to learn. I don't want to be a burden." Dante tilted his head slightly, as if reassessing her. "I can teach you how to survive in this world, but above all, I won't let anyone touch Ethan. I lost a child once, and I will never let that happen to someone else's child if I can prevent it." Haley looked at him, and for the first time she felt trust rising in her eyes. Something in the way he said those words, in the way he spoke of a child he had lost, pulled at her chest. That pain wasn't fabricated, it was real, and it shaped him into a man trying to make amends for something unchangeable. "So, where do I start?" she asked softly. "In the kitchen." Dante gave her the first smile she had ever seen on him. "You worked in a bar. You've dealt with all kinds of people. I need someone in the back office handling orders, books, and sometimes preparing a private dinner for certain guests." Haley raised an eyebrow. "Guests like you?" "Not exactly," Dante said with a small shrug, a flash of dry humor in his eyes. "Guests like me leave generous tips, but also tend to bring trouble. I believe you know how to stay out of trouble or learn fast." They exchanged a small laugh, the first moment between them untouched by fear or caution. When Dante stood, he looked at Haley like a partner, no longer a woman who needed shelter. "From now on, you and Ethan will live here. Keeping you both safe is my responsibility. But if you want to live, not just survive, this is your chance." Haley nodded, fingers tightening slightly. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel alone. And though the future was still shrouded in uncertainty, she knew one thing with absolute clarity. Ethan had been right to trust this man, and now she did too. Haley began her first day in the kitchen of Moretti's table, wearing a black apron embroidered with a small logo and carrying an empty notebook. She knew little about fine dining and even less about how a prestigious Manhattan restaurant operated, but she knew she could learn, and more importantly, she wanted to. Dante didn't teach her directly. Instead, he assigned Marco, the Italian head chef with sharp eyes and curt speech, softened by a hint of kindness. Marco didn't greet her with a smile, but with a single warning. If she planned to work here, she'd better not spill the truffle sauce. Haley nodded, rolled up her sleeves, and started with peeling potatoes, chopping onions, cleaning knives, and checking ingredients every morning. Small tasks, fast rhythm, high precision, and no room for mistakes. At first she fumbled, even dropping an expensive jar of spices and earning a blistering glare from Marco. But after a few days, Haley began remembering the routines, mastering the proper fold of napkins for dinner service, learning where each wine bottle belonged in the cellar, and even recognizing which guest simply wanted a quiet meal, and which one was negotiating an unofficial deal under candlelight. She learned quickly, worked hard, and never asked why. That was why Marco began trusting her with more prepping ingredients, managing supplies, even delivering special desserts to VIP guests. Outside the kitchen, Dante still watched from a distance. He didn't interfere, but his presence alone was a shield, an unspoken protection that commanded respect for Haley, not because she held privilege, but because she chose to rise from nothing in a world where women like her weren't expected to last long. Meanwhile, Ethan began his first week at a small private school a few blocks away. The classes were small, the teachers kind, and there was even a student counseling room run by a woman named Miss Lindsay, whose voice was soft and whose eyes carried endless understanding. Haley had feared Ethan would struggle to adjust, but the opposite happened. He blended in astonishingly fast. He told his mother about Julian, who loved to draw, about Zoe, who shared mint candies, and the library that was bigger than their entire old apartment in Brooklyn. Every afternoon, Ethan ran back to the restaurant with stories bubbling out of him, while Haley still wore her apron, hands dusted with flour. Slowly, The line between two worlds, one she had lived in and the one she had fallen into, began to blur. Haley began to understand how the restaurant worked as a crossroads for information, deals, and quiet negotiations tucked between three-course meals. She didn't get involved, didn't ask questions, but she sometimes recognized a face. The man eating cauliflower cream soup last night might be the same one on the morning news announcing a major corporate merger. Dante kept his distance, speaking to her only when necessary, but every time their eyes met, Haley felt something growing quietly beneath the surface. One evening, after cleaning the kitchen, Haley stood by the third-floor window overlooking the street below. Ethan slept peacefully, like a child who had never run through the rain in terror. She placed her hand on the cool glass, wondering what had brought her here. A random tattoo, a single night of violence, a man who stepped out of the shadows, and now a new life, one in which, for the first time in years, she felt her worth. Haley closed her eyes and smiled, soft, quiet, real. Not because everything was fixed, but because she knew she had started over, exactly where she needed to be. The bond between Haley and Dante did not begin with promises or lingering touches, but grew slowly in the long stretches of silence, in the moments when their eyes met at the end of a long day, in the quiet questions no one else would ever hear. Dante remained as composed as ever, yet Haley started noticing the subtle shifts in the way he looked at her. It was no longer the gaze of a protector or the man who had saved her and her son, but the careful attention of someone who had lived too long with loneliness and now found himself strangely unsettled by the urge to care for another person. On late nights, when the restaurant was still and empty, Dante often invited her for a glass of red wine, sitting with her in the wine room and asking simple questions like what had made her smile that day. At first, Haley only brushed it off, assuming he was being polite, but over time she realized it was his way of listening quietly, patiently, in his own restrained manner. Once, when Ethan came down with a mild fever and she found herself torn between tending to her child and finishing her shift in the kitchen, Dante quietly arranged for a private nurse to check on him within the hour. When she rushed back after work, her heart tight with fear, she found Ethan tucked neatly into a clean bed, the blanket pulled to his chin, a bottle of medicine beside him. Dante sat in the chair by the bed, reading to him in a voice so low and gentle that Haley, standing in the doorway, felt tears spill without warning. She wasn't crying out of fear anymore, but because no one had ever done something like that for her and her son without conditions, without hidden motives. After that night, she began opening up, telling him more about her past, her parents, and why she never got another tattoo besides the 3 plum blossoms. Dante listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally, but Haley knew he stored every word somewhere deep in his mind. On another evening, after her shift ended late and a heavy rain had begun to fall, Dante himself waited at the door with an umbrella. He didn't say anything, simply held it out to her, yet walked close enough so that the wind struck his shoulder instead of hers. Under the streetlights, Haley looked up at the man beside her, wondering how someone who had survived so many wounds could still be so gentle. She found herself looking forward to those moments not because of the protection he offered, but because his presence made her feel seen, listened to, understood without explanation. Ethan grew closer to Dante too, calling him Uncle D, sometimes joking that if Haley didn't smile enough, Uncle D would ban her from the kitchen. Haley always blushed and laughed in embarrassment, but Dante only smiled faintly, neither denying nor acknowledging the joke. Nothing was spoken between them, yet everything was there, clear as breath. One night, as Haley stood on the rooftop with the wind threading through her hair and the city lights shimmering in the distance, Dante stepped up beside her, no wine, no invitation. They stood together in silence, like two strangers who somehow knew each other's wounds by heart. When he turned toward her, his eyes were no longer those of Moretti the kingpin, but of a man who had lived enough to believe that, no matter how late in life, it was still possible to begin again if someone was willing to walk beside him through the dark. Haley said nothing, only nodded when he brushed the back of her hand with his fingers. In that fleeting moment, she felt no fear, no weight of the past, only the truth that she was no longer alone. And maybe, for the first time, she allowed herself to believe in something gentler than pain. That same night, while Haley was reorganizing the bar shelves at Marco's request, she happened to spot a small piece of paper wedged between 2 old bottles. The scrap was yellowed with age, the ink faded but unmistakable. 3 white plum blossoms with one falling petal exactly like the tattoo on her wrist had been sketched in the corner. Below them were English notes, mixed with a few Japanese symbols she couldn't decipher, except for 2 words written more clearly than the rest: Carter and shipment. Her heart dropped. Carter, the name Dante had mentioned in a brief meeting a few weeks earlier. The man who ran a chain of restaurants in Queens. Outwardly a businessman, but beneath the surface, the figure behind an Expedio, illegal shipping network linked to a Yakuza faction rumored to be resurfacing in New York. Haley froze, the paper trembling in her hand as she remembered the cold eyes of the 2 men who had attacked her in the bar. They had spoken of Tokyo, of betrayal, of that symbol she had always thought meaningless. Could Carter be connected to what had happened to her? She slipped the note into her apron and hurried toward the wine room upstairs, where Dante was meeting privately with Giovanni. Without knocking, she entered, her voice breaking in urgency as she placed the paper onto the table. "I found this under the shelf, and I don't think it's an accident." Dante picked up the scrap, his expression darkening instantly. He examined the marks, the faded letters, and especially the drawing. His hand tightened. Giovanni glanced at him before quietly closing the door to keep them undisturbed. "Carter once worked with a group in Tokyo," Dante said slowly, each word careful. "The group used this symbol, but as far as I know, they were wiped out over a decade ago. And Carter, he never leaves traces this obvious." Haley sat down, her pulse hammering. "If he's trying to bring them back? If my tattoo wasn't random at all? I got it because I thought it was pretty in a movie. But now I wonder if someone steered me toward it on purpose, so I'd wear something that never belonged to me." Dante looked at her for a long moment, then turned to Giovanni. "Check the client list from the last 3 months. Flag anyone tied to Carter, even indirectly. And review the shipments from 3 months ago, including anything that passed through the prep kitchen." Giovanni nodded and left. When they were alone, the air thickened until Haley struggled to breathe. She glanced at Dante and saw a tension in his eyes she had never seen before, not because she brought bad news, but because what she had uncovered hit the heart of something he had suspected for a long time. "Do you think he knows I'm here?" she whispered. Dante didn't answer at once. He folded his hands, staring toward the window where the city glowed as it always did, though in his eyes, it had changed. "He doesn't need to know who you are, only that you wear that symbol and walk inside my territory. To him, that alone is a declaration of war." A chill swept through Haley, as if cold wind had traveled all the way from Tokyo just to reach her. She realized that things would no longer stop at the tattoo on her wrist. It was the prologue to something larger, a scheme whose center somehow began with her. That night the wind rose sharply, rushing through Manhattan's narrow alleyways and rattling glass doors. Inside Moretti's table, the air was calm as usual, the remaining staff cleaning the last traces of the evening service. Haley was wiping down the spice shelves in the prep kitchen when the lights flickered and went out for a fraction of a second, freezing her in place. The sharp shatter of glass echoed from the front of the restaurant like a gunshot tearing through the quiet. A scream cut through the room, then vanished, leaving a hollow silence behind. Haley didn't need long to understand. She sprinted toward the exit of the kitchen just as a gust of cold air swept in, accompanied by pounding footsteps and the metallic clatter of weapons. She turned toward the stairs to find Ethan, when a rough arm yanked her backward and slammed her against the wall. 3 men stood in front of her, all in black, their faces uncovered but their eyes dead cold. One drew a gun from his waistband and pointed it straight at her. "You're Haley Grant." His voice was flat and hard. She didn't answer, her breath ragged as she searched frantically for an escape. "Good. Listen. You come with us, and nobody dies tonight." He signaled the others to search the room. Another man pulled out a phone and tapped rapidly, contacting someone. Haley struggled, but the hand on her arm was like a vice, dragging her toward the back exit that led to the parking lot. She screamed, "Ethan, Dante!" before another hand clamped over her mouth. The world spun in the strobe of flashing red emergency lights. Upstairs, Dante shot to his feet as the internal alarm blared. He didn't speak, only glanced at Giovanni before pulling a gun from his desk drawer. "Where is she?" he asked, his voice unnervingly steady. "She was in the prep kitchen," Giovanni replied, worry tightening his eyes. "Tell Ryan to check on Ethan. Make sure the boy is safe. I'm going down." As Dante descended the stairs, the first gunshot rang out. A guard lay collapsed near the entrance, blood spreading beneath the harsh hallway lights. Dante moved swiftly through the shadows, scanning blind corners, navigating the architecture he had designed for moments exactly like this. When he reached the parking lot, a black van's engine roared to life, headlights cutting across the rain-slick pavement. Haley was shoved into the back seat, duct tape slapped over her mouth, wrists bound tight. One of the kidnappers glanced back, their eyes meeting Dante's right as he stepped from the shadows. Nothing was said, but in that instant, war was declared. Dante raised his gun and fired. The bullet shattered the passenger side windshield and tore into the shoulder of the man sitting up front. Screams erupted as the van lurched backward, then sped off into the night. Haley had just enough time to see Dante chasing after them, gun in hand, his face colder than the wind slashing across his coat. Inside the van, she could feel not only the terror pulsing through her, but the knowledge that this was more than a kidnapping. It was a message from the underworld. They were ready to strike. And this time, they aimed squarely at Dante through the woman he was trying to protect. On the third floor, Ethan clung to Ryan, tears streaming down his face as he learned his mother had been taken. The air inside Moretti's table thickened, heavy with dread. At its center, Dante Moretti stood staring after the disappearing taillights, his gaze no longer merely angry. It was the fury of a man who had spent years locked in control, and he knew that from this moment forward, everything he had built would be tested not only by bullets and betrayal, but by the very feelings he had once sworn to bury. Because Haley was no longer someone who needed protection. She was now his only weakness, and the enemy had discovered it. The black van sped through 3 blocks before stopping in an abandoned warehouse lot on the outskirts of the city, a place untouched by streetlights where even the sound of traffic vanished into the rusted, crumbling walls. Haley was dragged out of the van, her hands still tied behind her back, her foot catching on the cold concrete as she stumbled, though her captor didn't bother to slow down. The taller man, ink crawling up one side of his neck, hauled her upright while muttering something in Japanese, his eyes as cold as forged steel. Inside the warehouse, a metal chair stood waiting in the center of the dusty floor. Haley was strapped into it, her mouth sealed again with tape. Her heart pounded, not out of fear for herself but from the thought that Ethan would believe she had abandoned him. She had no idea what would come next, but the men around her made no effort to hide the truth. She was a bargaining chip, a message carved in flesh meant for Dante. Then a sound crackled from outside the warehouse, the faint crunch of gravel under a boot. A guard near the door stepped forward, squinting into the darkness. The sound came again, closer this time, and then a soft, sharp click. The guard dropped without a word, a bullet buried in his temple. Gunfire erupted, tearing the night open with its cold, metallic fury. From 3 directions, Dante's men launched their assault. Giovanni led the southern flank, while Ryan and 2 others climbed across the roof. Dante was not behind them. He was the first to storm through the front entrance, his handgun steady as stone. When the gunshots cracked through the warehouse, Haley squeezed her eyes shut, instinctively twisting to roll herself away from the line of fire. One of the kidnappers seized her, trying to drag her into his grip as a shield, but a bullet tore into his shoulder before he could pull her close, sending him screaming to the ground. Haley crawled behind an old wooden crate, forcing herself to stay conscious as shouts, gunfire, and shattering glass collided around her. Dante saw her. For an instant, the entire chaos narrowed to the space between their eyes. He surged toward her, pulling her behind a concrete pillar. "You're safe. I'm here," he whispered, his voice impossibly steady. But there was no time for reassurance. A smoke grenade detonated nearby, filling the room with a choking white haze. Shots kept firing, sporadic, deadly. Someone screamed, Giovanni shouting orders. Ryan went down, wounded in the leg while shielding another man. One of Dante's team members was hit in the chest, blood soaking through his vest as he collapsed like a felled tree. Haley turned away, tears blurring her vision as horror twisted through her. These men were bleeding because of her, and there was nothing she could do. After 13 brutal minutes, the remaining Yakuza operatives retreated. 2 were taken alive, 3 lay dead on the floor, and the rest fled through the back exit. When silence finally settled, the air was thick with the stinging scent of gunpowder and blood. Dante guided Haley outside, his hand still gripping his weapon while his eyes never left her face. "Are you hurt?" he asked. When she shook her head, he nodded, but his gaze trembled with worry he couldn't hide. Giovanni approached with a heavy shake of his head. "We lost 2 men. Ryan is being taken to the hospital." Dante clenched his jaw, his hand trembling. This was no longer personal. This was war. A war born from a single woman whose tattoo had awakened a secret that should have stayed buried. But now all he could see was Haley clinging to his sleeve as if it were the last anchor she had left, and he knew there was no going back. 2 days after the shootout, the atmosphere inside Moretti's table felt heavy, as though the building itself was in mourning. The walls seemed to echo with gunshots, with panicked cries, with Haley's ragged breathing as she was pulled from the darkness of that warehouse. Ethan was placed temporarily in the home of one of Dante's most trusted chefs, guarded closely around the clock. Haley, though physically unharmed, lived in the shadow of another nightmare waiting to unfold. Sleep eluded her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the blood-soaked face of the guard who fell, and Dante's fury when he realized how close he had come to losing her. Yet the sharpest pain came not from those memories, but from the change in Dante himself. He no longer appeared beside her at the end of each day, no longer placed a quiet glass of wine on the table, no longer asked the small, gentle questions that once made her feel seen. He kept his distance, cold and silent. Whenever she approached, he answered only with curt nods or clipped sentences, as if she were no more than a distant employee. One evening, after Ethan called to say goodnight, Haley stood outside Dante's office, her hands clenched until her knuckles turned white. When the door opened, she walked in without waiting. "Why are you avoiding me?" she demanded, her voice tight not with fear but anger. Dante looked up from his files, his gaze resting on her for a heartbeat before lowering again. "You need to leave, as soon as possible." Haley stepped back as though he had struck her. "What did you just say?" "I've arranged for you and Ethan to relocate to a safe house in Vermont. My men will escort you until this is finished." His voice carried no emotion, as if he were issuing a routine command. "No, I'm not going anywhere. I chose to stay. I accepted the risks. Accepting is one thing. Surviving is another." Dante stood and moved toward her, his tone sharper than she had ever heard. "I let my emotions cloud my judgment. I thought I could protect you by keeping you close. I was wrong. You're bait, Haley. They don't want you. They want me. And you're the doorway. I'm not something you can hide away and then wash your hands of. You don't get to decide for me, not because you're weak. Because I can't watch another person die because of me." His voice broke, and at last she saw what he had been holding in all those silent days: pain, rage, helplessness. "You made me feel something I hadn't felt in years. And because of that, you can't stay. I can't lose you." Haley couldn't speak. She stared at the man before her, the man who had saved her, who had held her through flying bullets, who had once stood by her like a shield, now pushing her away because the thought of losing her terrified him more than death itself. Tears filled her eyes, not from fear but from the ache of a heart being pulled apart. "I'll go," she whispered. "But you have to promise me one thing." "What?" "Stay alive." Her gaze didn't waver. "If you're going to force me to leave, then you don't get to die before I come back to yell at you for it." Dante didn't answer. He only looked at her for a long, silent moment, then nodded. And when she turned away, tears still streaming, he closed his eyes as though he had just cut away a part of himself bleeding, but willing if it meant protecting the one thing he could not afford to lose. The next morning, Haley sat silently by the third-floor window, watching the first rays of daylight slip through the pale curtains. The small suitcase beside her chair was still, empty, not a single piece of clothing folded inside. Ethan had been moved to the safe apartment as Dante planned, but inside Haley there was a storm she could no longer quiet. She had once believed that if she truly loved her son, if she wanted to guarantee their survival, then the best thing she could do was obey him. But through the long night, sleep never came. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Dante's face, not the cold calculation of a Mafia kingpin, but the expression of a man forcing love out of his own heart just to save the person he loved. And it was that look, not fear, that made it impossible for her to leave. She could not become a shadow who survived only because someone else was willing to die in her place. She could not let Ethan grow up believing his mother ran instead of fought. When Dante walked into the room at noon, he froze at the sight of her still there. No suitcase, no packed bags, no goodbye letters. "I thought you'd already left," he said, his voice steady but his eyes betraying the truth. Haley rose and met his gaze. I planned to. I really did. I sat here all night thinking, weighing everything, fighting myself. And then I realized, I'm not the same woman who crumpled on that barroom floor. I've changed. This place, these people, and you made me stronger. I can't leave. I can't watch everyone here face danger alone. Dante clenched his jaw. You don't understand, Haley. If you stay, they'll come back. And next time won't be as simple as a kidnapping. I understand. More than you think. She stepped closer. But I also understand something else. I'm a target not because I'm weak, but because I matter to you. And if I run, I'll always be your Achilles heel, no matter where I go, Vermont or the other side of the world. Dante went still, unable to argue. She was right. Sending her away didn't remove the danger. It only moved it somewhere he couldn't guard. Then, what do you intend to do? He asked, his voice lower. I want to learn. Not just appetizers and wine pairings. I want to learn how to spot someone following me. How to fight back if someone puts a gun to my head. How to know when to run and when to stay. She lifted her chin. I don't want to be a victim anymore, Dante. I want to be an ally. Dante studied her for a long moment, then turned away, hiding the turmoil in his eyes. He walked to the bookshelf and pulled out a small wooden box. Are you sure? I am. Once you begin, you can't go back. I don't want to go back. He opened the box. Inside was a compact pistol with a swallow engraved on the grip. He placed it in her hand. Training starts tomorrow. Ryan will lead it. I'll supervise. But Haley, if you get hurt, if you die, I will never forgive myself. She smiled softly, gripping the gun with a determination she had never felt before. Then you'd better teach me well. In that moment, they were no longer boss and employee, no longer rescuer and rescued. They were two people choosing to stand on the same battlefield, not because they weren't afraid, but because losing each other terrified them far more than death. And from that moment on, Haley was no longer the one being protected. She became part of the fight she chose not to run from, not anymore. Training began on a fog-soaked morning when Moretti's table was still quiet and the city hadn't yet fully woken. Ryan arrived in a black jacket, the injury in his leg still visible but not slowing him. From now on, you're the rookie. No special treatment, no exceptions. It'll hurt, it'll exhaust you, and you'll want to quit. But if you're staying here, you need to know how to survive. Haley nodded, sweat already gathering on her palms. Ryan showed no mercy. The first lesson was how to fall without breaking a bone, how to escape when someone grabbed her wrist, how to disarm a gun at close range. Every movement was drilled into her until her shoulders burned and her knees bled from hitting the wooden floor over and over. But she never complained, never cried, never quit. Every time she fell, she stood up. Every time her arms were pinned, she learned where to shift her weight. Slowly, Ryan's skeptical glances shifted into something like respect. By the end of the first week, Haley managed to drop him with a quick pivot he didn't see coming. Ethan returned each evening, escorted by 2 plainclothes guards. He chattered happily about school, unaware that every morning his mother endured grueling training to become someone who could protect him with her own hands. Dante never joined the sessions, but he watched from the 3rd-floor balcony. He saw every stumble, every comeback, every moment she clenched her teeth and kept fighting. And each time she rose instead of ran, something in him healed. One night, as Haley wrapped a bandage around her knee under the warm kitchen lights, Dante entered with 2 glasses of wine. He set one in front of her and sat across from her. You did well today. Ryan says he's never seen anyone learn as fast as you. Haley picked up her glass, sipping slowly before giving him a half-teasing glance. I think I'm the only person who's come close to breaking his nose. Dante laughed, a rare, deep sound that filled the room with something warm and human. In that moment, the distance between them vanished. They weren't a kingpin and a former victim anymore. Just 2 people, sitting late at night, finding each other through the scars they carried. Those conversations became more frequent. They spoke about the past, about mistakes, about the lonely nights they'd never admitted to anyone, and the fears that had shaped them. Dante told her about the younger brother he lost in a botched retaliation, the weight of vengeance he carried but refused to let Ethan ever see. Haley told him about nights when she slept in her car, because she couldn't afford rent, about the ache of watching her son eat cold bread instead of a birthday cake. They didn't need to say they cared. Trust had already bridged every gap. One rainy evening, Haley trained alone on the practice deck. She spun and kicked at the heavy bag, rain sliding down her face. Before she could strike again, a figure approached with an umbrella. Dante. He didn't speak. He simply held the umbrella above her and extended a hand. "I want you to know," he said softly, "that if the day comes when you want to walk away from this world, I won't stop you. But if you stay, I'll fight beside you, every day, every minute." Haley took his hand, her fingers trembling from the cold, but her gaze steady. "I've already chosen, and I'm not going back." In the quiet rain, with only the golden hall lights behind them, their hands intertwined, no vows, no theatrics, just two people who had been broken choosing quietly to be strong together. One early winter morning, as a pale gray sky settled over the rooftops, an urgent package arrived at Dante's private office. It carried no sender's name, only a deep red seal. Haley was shelving books when she saw Dante open the box. His face changed instantly, not anger, but a flash of horror so raw it made the hands of a man known for his steadiness tremble. "What is it?" she asked, hurrying to him. Dante didn't speak. He simply turned the box toward her. Inside wasn't a bomb, nor an empty threat. It was Ethan's blue knitted scarf, the one Haley had made herself, the one he'd taken with him to the safe house that morning. Beneath it lay a Polaroid of Ethan, bound and gagged, his eyes wide with terror against the backdrop of an old warehouse. A single handwritten note lay beneath the photo. "Your safe house isn't as safe as you think, Dante. I'll be waiting at the old harbor at 8 p.m. Come alone, or I'll send the boy back in pieces." Haley felt the ground fall, away beneath her. She clamped a hand over her mouth to smother the scream rising in her throat, hot tears spilling down her cheeks. How did he get to my son? Ryan said that place was absolutely secure." "There's a mole," Dante said, his voice low and cold as ice, his eyes darkening with a murderous intensity. "Or he's been tracking us longer than I realized. He wants me. Ethan is only bait." He shot to his feet, grabbed his coat, and checked his gun. "I'm going to get him back. You stay here. Giovanni will protect you." "No." Haley blocked his path, brushing the tears from her face, revealing an expression steadier and fiercer than he had ever seen. "That's my son. You think I can sit here and wait? Haley, this is a death trap. He wants to kill me, and he won't hesitate to kill you. If he wanted you dead, he would have shot you from the shadows. He wants a performance, and you need someone at your back he won't expect." She strode to the cabinet, took out her own gun, the motion swift and practiced. "I'm not asking for permission, Dante. I'm telling you, I'm coming." Dante stared at her, the conflict in his eyes palpable. But then he looked at Ethan's photo, and he understood there was no time left for arguments. He nodded slowly, heavily like a vow sealed in blood. Her answer left him silent. Haley was no longer the terrified woman hiding behind him. She now stood beside him, with all her resolve and unwavering faith. Preparations began immediately. Giovanni gathered intel on the meeting spot, a derelict warehouse near the Hudson River, once a cargo transfer point but abandoned for years. Ryan, still limping, begged to go, but Dante refused. "You have a son. I need you alive." Ryan said nothing more, only nodded, and handed Dante a detailed layout of the warehouse. Haley checked her weapon 3 times, recalling every move Ryan had taught her. She barely spoke that evening, staying close to Dante, her eyes never leaving him. They didn't need to voice their fear. Both knew this could be the last night they walked the world as whole people. On the night of the meeting, light rain pattered against the car windows as they drove toward the river. Dante wore a dark gray suit, another gun concealed beneath his coat. Haley wore a high-collared sweater, her hair tied back, her eyes sharp as steel. They parked 300 meters from the warehouse and walked the rest of the way. Neither spoke. Nearing the entrance, they stopped behind a concrete wall. Dante peered toward the slightly open warehouse door, where a faint yellow light spilled out. No movement, no voices. Only rain and the soft slap of waves against the shore. "Something's wrong," Haley whispered. Dante nodded. "Get ready." They entered, their footsteps echoing unnervingly on the concrete floor. The air smelled of old oil and rust. A long table sat in the center, set with a teapot and 2 chairs. But no Carter, no one at all, only silence waiting to snap shut. Dante sat at one of the chairs, eyes fixed on the back door. Haley stood behind him, her hand resting on her hidden weapon. Seconds thickened into minutes, until a faint click echoed through the air coming from the ventilation system above. Haley looked up just as the lights went out. Total darkness. Then the storm broke loose. Explosive footsteps pounded in from all four sides. Metal clattered. Shadows dropped from the rafters like vultures. Dante sprang to his feet, drawing his gun. Haley spun toward the nearest sound and fired the first shot. They were surrounded, and the so-called peace meeting was nothing but the opening move of a meticulously planned ambush. In the chaotic darkness, Haley understood the most important truth. The problem wasn't that they had no exit. The problem was that their enemies had already decided neither of them would leave alive. For a few seconds, the warehouse was pitch black, but that was long enough for chaos to ignite. Emergency lights flickered to life in stuttering red bursts, slicing through smoke as the first gunshots cracked like thunder. Haley slid right, pressing her back against a cold steel column, gripping her gun tight. Dante was no longer in sight, but she knew he was fighting somewhere in the maze of metal and shadows ahead. A scream tore through the air from above, a child's scream. Haley's entire body froze. Ethan. She recognized it instantly. It echoed down from the second floor. They were keeping him up there. She ran blindly, fearlessly, her gun firing at shadows moving toward the back hallway. Bullets tore into crates, whistled past her cheek, but she didn't slow. Every shred of fear was devoured by her son's cries. A huge man blocked the stairway, gun raised. Haley didn't stop. Sliding on one knee, she fired upward. The bullet ripped through his knee, dropping him with a howl. She stepped over him and charged up the stairs. The door at the end of the hall flew open under her kick. Ethan sat tied in the corner, a guard standing over him. He turned at the noise, but too late. Haley shot him in the chest. He collapsed. She rushed to Ethan, tore the tape from his mouth, and gathered him into her arms as he sobbed. "You're okay. You're okay. I'm here," she whispered through her own ragged breaths, clutching him as if she could fuse him back into her heart. But footsteps thundered up the stairs. A familiar outline filled the doorway. Carter. He wore a white shirt, gun dangling from his hand like an afterthought, his eyes cold with the indifference of a man who met death too often to fear it. "Such a nuisance," he sighed, as if lecturing a child. "Did you really think you could save everyone, Haley?" She pushed Ethan behind her, gripping her empty gun. Carter strolled closer, unhurried, confident. "I should have killed you the first time, back at that bar." Haley didn't flinch. "And now you came all this way to finish the job? Or just to die in the most pathetic way imaginable?" Before he could react, she dropped, grabbed the guard's fallen weapon, rolled, and fired twice. Carter dodged fast, but not fast enough. One bullet slammed into his left shoulder. He roared and shot back. Haley yanked Ethan toward the corner. A bullet clipped a strand of her hair and buried itself in the wall. With no time to waste, she shoved Ethan toward the small window behind them. "Go, find Dante. I'll be fine." Ethan screamed for her, but her eyes told him she meant it. Carter charged, both hands raised to fire, but Haley threw herself sideways, kicking his arm. The gun skittered across the floor. They grappled, her forearm pressing into his throat as he clawed at her arms. For a split second, she looked straight into his eyes and saw shock. He had never expected her to fight back. Never imagined the woman who once kneeled and trembled would now make him gasp for air. A gunshot cracked. Carter went rigid. Haley shoved him off and saw Dante standing in the doorway, smoke curling from his gun. Carter collapsed, eyes wide in disbelief, blood blooming beneath him. Ethan ran into his mother's arms. Dante stepped closer, his gaze sweeping over both of them, before settling on Haley for a long, heavy moment. She nodded, her hands still shaking but her eyes steady. She had done it. She had saved her son. And in a world where death could arrive in a heartbeat, she had proven something undeniable. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was fighting. The final gunshot echoed through the hallway, like the closing punctuation to a nightmare that had stretched on for months. Carter collapsed into a pool of blood, his eyes wide and empty, as if even in his final breath he couldn't comprehend losing to the very two people he had always dismissed as insignificant. Haley held Ethan tightly against her, her breathing ragged, her hands still trembling, from the battle she had fought to the edge of life and death. Dante lowered his gun, his gaze fixed on the lifeless body of the man who had been a looming shadow over everything he cherished. But before he could take another step, he froze. Blood was seeping through his vest, darkening the fabric as it spread. Haley saw it first. "Dante." Her voice broke, and she nearly stumbled, rushing toward him. Dante tried to stay upright, but his body faltered. He sank to one knee, pressing a hand against the wound that refused to stop bleeding. "Just a scratch," he muttered, though his face was draining of color. "Be quiet," Haley whispered, supporting him as she tore her sleeves to staunch the bleeding. "Don't talk, don't move, just breathe." Ethan knelt beside them, terror filling his young eyes as he stared at the man he had slowly learned to trust, now looking fragile and unfamiliar. "We have to get him out. Right now." Haley spoke as if commanding the world to whenever obey. Her eyes locked on Dante's paling face. In the distance, sirens began to wail police. Ambulances Giovanni and Ryan must have called for backup when no one answered their radios. Haley glanced one last time at Carter. His body was still, but she felt no triumph, only the grim closure of something that needed to end so that life could continue. A debt of blood settled by blood, but none of them were whole enough to celebrate. Dante forced his eyes open, his gaze drifting over Haley and Ethan as though trying to etch their faces into memory. "You did well," he murmured, his voice thinning. Haley shook her head, her tears falling onto the wound he tried to hide. "No, we're not done. You're not allowed to die. You haven't even taught me how to reload one-handed yet." Dante let out a faint laugh, a ghost of the unbreakable man he had always been. "Then you'll have to promise to outlive me." "I will. But not today." Haley tightened her grip on him. When the medics arrived, everything blurred. She felt nothing but Dante's hand growing colder in hers. They lifted him onto the stretcher, blood soaking through the white padding. She followed without a single step of distance, Ethan clutching her shirt with wide, unblinking eyes. Carter was dead. The war that had seemed endless had finally reached its conclusion. But the wounds it left on their bodies, on their hearts, would not fade quickly. And Haley had only one wish left, that the price of survival would not be losing the man she had come to love without realizing it, with a gratitude, respect, and trust she had found only once in her lifetime. Dante survived the surgery, which lasted more than 8 hours. 3 bullets were removed from his body, and the doctor warned he would need at least 6 months to fully recover. But for Dante, survival wasn't a miracle, it was a final chance to do what was right. For 2 weeks he hardly left his hospital bed, but news of Carter's death spread across the underworld like a wave washing away doubt. No one dared touch Dante's people now. No one whispered about war or revenge. They knew an empire had been secured, but what truly silenced them was the image of Haley, a woman with no ties to their world, who had walked into the heart of danger with a gun for the sake of love and life, protecting them with everything she had. When Dante was discharged, he didn't return to the restaurant right away. Instead, he called Giovanni, Ryan, and several key members of the organization to a house overlooking the Hudson River, a place he had owned for more than a decade. Haley wasn't there and hadn't been invited, and she understood why. This was a matter of the old world, and Dante was preparing to step out of it. "I guided this organization through 3 generations of enemies, 20 years of war, and more deaths than I can count," he said, his voice rough but resolute, "and I nearly died protecting the one thing that reminded me I was still human. I can't stay in a world where I must choose between power and love at every turn." Giovanni bowed his head. Ryan said nothing, but both men understood the choice was the right one. From now on, Giovanni will take over strategy and diplomacy. Ryan will manage security and training. All armed operations will wind down over the next 3 years. What we leave behind shouldn't be blood, it should be balance. Legal business. A different path for the children we once used as currency. No one objected. They were all too weary of loss. Each had buried a brother, a wife, a child sacrificed to pride and territory, and a legacy that had cost them too much. After the meeting, Dante returned to the restaurant for the first time. Moretti's table had reopened, its windows replaced, its walls painted a bit brighter. Haley was wiping the bar counter when he walked in, her hair tied back, a faint scar still visible on her wrist from her early shooting lessons. She looked up when she saw him, her eyes lingering on him as if needing to confirm he was truly alive. truly standing there. "You disappeared without saying a word," she said, her voice steady but unable to hide her hurt. "I needed time to do something important," Dante replied, stepping closer. "I stepped down. The organization is no longer mine. I made my choice." Haley met his gaze, her heartbeat quickening the way it had the night their lives first collided. "And what did you choose?" "I chose to live. I chose Ethan. And if you'll still have me, I choose you." The words weren't poetic or grand, but they were enough to make Haley laugh through her tears. She stepped out from behind the bar and wrapped her arms around him without hesitation. In that moment, they both understood that all the suffering had led them here not to break them, but to begin again. A life without guns, without blood, without shadows, only the faint glow of fragile, human hope. A man who had once ruled the underworld now stood behind a bar with the woman he loved, watching the little boy who used to look at him with suspicion run through the kitchen as if it were home. And for the first time in all their lives, they could finally call a place exactly that home. A year after the ordeal, Moretti's table was no longer just a modest Italian restaurant tucked into a Brooklyn corner. It had become a destination for true food lovers, a place where handcrafted dishes carried the quiet story of people who had walked through darkness and lived to tell their tale. Haley was now the official head chef, no longer the apprentice standing behind the bar as she had been on her first day. She ran the kitchen with a confidence she once could not have imagined for herself. Her spring menu was featured in a renowned culinary magazine, and a well-known food blogger described dining at Moretti's as warm like a mother's embrace, yet delicate like being led through a memory. Every dish held a deep personal imprint, sometimes a bit of heat from the days Haley had fought for her life, sometimes a gentle sweetness from the quiet evenings she spent with Ethan and Dante. None of the guests knew that the woman carefully plating their ravioli had once held a gun to fight for her child against a killer. All they felt was a vitality in her movements, an unnamed energy that made people feel safe and quietly healed. Ethan had changed too, as though the old fractures in his small heart had been patched with love and the steady presence of a real family. He now attended a private elementary school nearby, where teachers knew each child by name, and lunches were cooked fresh every day. He excelled in math, loved soccer, and adored history. He no longer flinched at loud noises, no longer checked his mother's phone whenever she stepped out of the room. He knew she would come back. He knew they were safe. Each evening after work, Haley came home, cooked dinner with Ethan, and the two of them read together or watched cartoons. Sometimes Dante joined them, even though he still struggled to follow animated characters who talked too fast and too much. But he was patient, gentle, no longer the mob boss sitting behind a large desk giving cold commands. He was a family man now, willing to wipe Ethan's mouth when the boy laughed so hard he spat water across the table. His wound had healed, though doctors required regular checkups. He complied like a model student, and Haley went with him every time. She never wandered too far from him now. After everything they had endured, both understood that presence was the most powerful language of love. In the fall, Haley was invited to speak at a conference for female chefs who had overcome hardship. She stood on stage before hundreds of people, recounting her journey from a girl, wiping bar counters and living on tips, to a woman leading a celebrated kitchen and raising a child with both tenderness and discipline. When the talk ended, someone stood and asked, "If you could choose again, would you want a life without all that pain?" Haley fell silent for a few seconds. She thought of the first time she was beaten in a cold storage room, of the moment she saw blood on her son's face, of the screams that tore through her when Ethan was taken, and she also thought of Dante's warm hand holding hers after the storm. Then she smiled gently and answered, "I wouldn't choose the pain, but I would choose what it taught me. I'd choose the strength I found when I thought I had none. And if I had to walk that same path again to have the life I have now, I wouldn't hesitate." The audience rose and applauded, but what moved her most was seeing Dante in the last row, silently nodding as if saying, "Me too." That night, they drove home in quiet. Ethan had fallen asleep in the back seat. Haley rested her head on Dante's shoulder, her fingers intertwined with his. Autumn winds brushed past like reminders of what had been lost, but also like promises of what was still to come. And Haley knew that whatever tomorrow held, she was no longer a woman running from fate. She had stepped into the fire and walked out stronger than ever. That evening, the air was crisp, and the yellow glow from the street lamps filtered through bare autumn branches, casting a peaceful hue over everything. Haley didn't know that after a long day at the restaurant, after tucking Ethan into bed and washing the last dishes in the sink, her life was about to turn down yet another path. Dante asked her to dress up, saying a small surprise was waiting on the rooftop. She laughed but did as he asked, her hair tied in a loose bun, a soft cream dress falling gracefully around her. The woman in the mirror no longer looked like someone shaped by fear and desperation, but someone living a life filled with meaning. When she opened the rooftop door, she froze. Hundreds of small lanterns hung above her, glowing softly. In the center stood a simple but warmly set table with wine and 2 plates of pasta Dante had made himself. But what stole her breath wasn't the lights or the food, it was Dante kneeling on one knee, holding a red velvet box. Haley brought a hand to her mouth as tears spilled instantly. Dante looked up at her, his eyes still steady, still powerful, but filled with a tenderness the world had never granted her before. He spoke softly, each word carving itself into her heart. I spent my life in the dark, Haley, thinking that was the only way to protect what I loved. Then you came not to pull me out of the darkness, but to make it no longer frightening. I can't promise life will always be gentle, but I can promise to hold your hand through every storm that comes. Be my wife. Haley couldn't speak at first. She simply nodded over and over, smiling through her tears so brightly that Dante felt his heart break open all over again. This time from happiness. He slipped the ring onto her finger, stood, and held her close. On that rooftop, with only the night breeze and soft lantern light as witnesses, 2 broken souls found each other at the right moment, in the right way, with the right hearts. A few months later, they held a simple but heartfelt wedding at the very restaurant where everything had begun. Ethan carried the rings, beaming in his tiny suit. Ryan walked Haley down the aisle, and Giovanni gave a speech like an older brother welcoming her into the family. No one mentioned the past, but everyone understood that this day marked the end of an era and the beginning of a new life. A life with family, warmth, children's laughter, and dinners shared in peace. Haley, who once feared every sunrise because she didn't know how she would survive another day, now welcomed the morning with gratitude and a quiet heart. Dante, who once commanded hundreds of lives, now needed only to watch his young son run around the room and hear the tender sound of being called Dad. And dear friend, if you've stayed with this story until the very last moments, ask yourself what truly matters in your own life. Maybe it isn't money or power, but someone to trust, a place to call home, a moment when you feel loved and truly alive. Haley and Dante's story reminds us that no matter how dark the past has been, if you refuse to give up, the light will find you when you least expect it. And what about you? Have you ever met someone who changed your life? Ever realized that the smallest things can be the greatest gifts? Share your thoughts below. We read and treasure every feeling from our viewers. And if you love emotional, genuine stories filled with hope like this one, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share so we can bring these stories to more people who need them. Every view, every subscription is a source of strength for us to continue creating meaningful videos every day. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video where stories aren't just told, but felt and reflected upon. Wishing each of you good health, steady spirits, and a peaceful, joyful life every single day. Goodbye, and see you again soon.